Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ransomware in the Enterprise, Cyber Resiliency from 1,200 Successful Attacks. Today's webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Keith Ward. I am from Actual Tech Media, and I am truly excited to be your moderator for this special event. But before we get to the content here, we do have a few housekeeping items you need to know that'll help you get the most out of this session. All right, first off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll go into detail on some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might experience. Remember that a browser refresh is your first go-to. So if you got any audio, video, slide advancement issues, make sure you refresh your browser first. Then if that doesn't work, let us know and we will get one of our crack staff members right on top of it. Okay, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find some great resources that I strongly encourage that you check out now. Especially, I'd like to let you know about two critical handouts from Veeam that you will find there. By the way, the handouts tab is right next to the questions tab in that panel there. The two resources that you really need to take a look at are from Veeam, the Ransomware Trends Report and the Strategic Framework for Ransomware Resilience. Great stuff in both of those. Make sure you download them. Now, in the handout section, you'll also find links to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on a host of technology topics. There's also a link there to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. I encourage you to look that over. We've got some great stuff coming up. Third, at the end of this event, we'll also be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one registrant. Now, as a reminder, you have to be in attendance during the entire live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can also be found in that handout section. And one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. To help encourage those questions, we have a special additional prize for you. Isn't that nice of us? That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So after the event's over, we'll look at all the questions that come in. We'll pick out the best one, contact that prize winner. Okay, enough of the boring stuff. Let's get to the good stuff. Joining me today to discuss this highly topical issue are Misha Rangel, Director of Product Marketing, Portfolio and Operations at Veeam, and Jeff, aka Commander Reichard, Vice President for Solution Strategy at Veeam. Misha and Jeff, it is great to have you here. I have you now on, and the floor is yours. So, Misha, please take it away.
Thank you. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot of great content to cover today. So as we were introduced, I'm Misha Rangel, and I'm here with my friend Jeff Reichert today to talk to you all about ransomware attacks and some of the great data that we have compiled. So hopefully you'll leave here a little smarter and have some great takeaways on how you could better protect your organization and recover faster from cyber attacks. So here's just a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to go through some stats around ransomware pervasiveness. We all know this is a problem. You probably wouldn't be here if you weren't concerned about this. Secondly, we're going to really dive into cyber attack and then recovery and stats and tactics around how customers are addressing this. Third, we are going to talk about cyber insurance. Our research has showed some really interesting, fast-changing trends around cyber insurance. So Jeff is going to take us through those. And then finally, we're going to end with some best practices and recommendations because there are solutions and things that companies can do to mediate these issues, and we want to be sure that you're armed with best practices to do so. All right, so it was mentioned that in the resources, in the handouts section, there are a few really helpful handouts. You also see a QR code up here in the top right of your screen. You could scan that as well to get a copy of our Ransomware Trends Report that Veeam launched just back in May, so just a few months ago. This is fresh off the press research. So Veeam conducted this research with 1,200 unbiased IT leaders. That means that, this is a statistically significant representation of the market globally. And you could see how that breaks down. We also surveyed varied groups of individuals within IT organizations, specifically around the topic of ransomware. I really love this research because, something that we have found, and you may identify with this as well, is that companies are not necessarily looking to publicize that they have experienced ransomware attacks, but in an anonymous survey such as this, we see really sobering reality in terms of how pervasiveness it is. So it's probably, the least talked about topic on, a level, but also something that all of us are worried about. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Jeff to talk through some top-level trends we're seeing with ransomware. Jeff, take it away.
That sounds perfect. Thanks so much, Misha. So I want to stress a point that Misha made. I know a lot of organizations, particularly large organizations with mature security practices, are explicitly forbidden from talking with other organizations about security events they have, ransomware incidents that they have. And that's one of the reasons that this kind of anonymous survey, where the respondents didn't know that it was Veeam asking the questions, and we don't know who the respondents were, except as you just saw on the last slide, a lot of them were large organizations. It's very interesting to hear this, to see this, because you get people to sort of open up a bit about what's really going on. And that's particularly helpful if you compare it to the sort of headline-driven way that I think a lot of us encounter that in the news. We will see various attacks play out. We will see different organizations being compromised by these attacks. And I took some examples for this particular discussion from UK and Canada attacks that have happened lately. The problem with anecdotal views of ransomware attacks, even though we're barraged with them, is that sometimes, while they're concerning, senior financial leadership or executive leadership doesn't feel like they give enough information to really quantify what the risk is, and therefore to make investments that their IT teams might have their hair on fire saying, look, we have to do this right away. This is critical. But without data, sometimes that case can be harder for us to make to senior executive and financial leadership. And so Veeam does, exactly as Misha mentioned, one of the biggest surveys that's done out there this year, 1,200 organizations. The only thing that they all had to have in common was that they got hit by a ransomware attack. We do other research as well, and we're going to kind of blend some of those stats on the next slide. If we go from, oops, looks like we had a little misfire on this one. Let me refresh my screen and see if it builds right. Okay, well, if you download the report, you'll see that middle build come out, and I'll just read through it to you now. Basically, what we found in two of the surveys that we did this year is that when we asked over 4,000 organizations if they'd experienced a ransomware attack, this is a survey that we released back in January, fully 85% had been hit with ransomware in 2022. Very, very sobering numbers if you think about it. It's even worse because the previous year's statistic was that 76% of organizations had been hit by ransomware. So it's getting worse. In fact, what we found this year is that an organization is more likely to get hit quarterly by ransomware than they are not to get hit at all. And again, we'll have links to this, and you saw the QR code on the last slide. All these stats are in the Ransomware Trends Report. What's even more troubling, the middle stat here, which at least on my screen didn't build out right, but again, you can see it in the report, is that 16% of organizations only were able to recover without paying the ransom. And there are some reasons for that we'll dig into more as we go through the rest of the talk today. But if you think about the idea that we only had, such a small number of organizations that were able to get back up and running, basically 1 in 7 that were able to get back up and running without rewarding criminals for taking our assets offline, that situation's pretty grim. It's even worse when you realize that a large number of organizations, 25% who did pay the ransom, didn't get their data back. That may seem like a strange number until you compare it to the worst ransomware attack in history, which was actually just about exactly 6 years ago, not Petya. That did over $10 billion worth of damage worldwide. And in that attack, it actually wasn't possible to pay a ransom and get your data back. It was just wiper malware. And so it's important to realize that for a variety of reasons, if your financial leadership, if the board thinks that worst case, we can just pay the ransom and recover, that's a very false sense of security. And of course, we're going to dig more into that as we go through the talk today about what the actual realities are about paying ransoms. One other thing in terms of the pervasiveness of ransomware, not just how often organizations get hit, but one of the things that the research showed clearly is where organizations get hit. It's common, I think, for folks to think that, yes, laptops or remote offices might get hit. Yes, our data center might get hit. It is unfortunately also common when I speak, and I think, Misha, your experience has probably been the same, with organizations about their cloud-hosted services, whether it is software as a service or platform as a service, or more straightforward, VMs, infrastructure as a service, for folks to think that those are somehow exempt. And what this data shows, if you look at the slide, the bars for the amount of data that are affected in the ransomware attack, there are small differences, but they're basically within the margin of error for the survey. What we see really, really clearly is that you are exactly as likely to have your data center data affected as you are to have cloud-hosted platforms affected. There is no difference. And this is something that should really, really drive behavior when you're thinking about what your data protection strategy is going to be. In other words, if your technical leadership, if your financial or executive leadership are patting themselves on the back and saying, well, at least we've moved, a third of our workloads or half of our workloads up to the cloud, they're safe from this, that is absolutely not the case. And again, you need to be planning accordingly in your cyber resilience strategy to make sure that everywhere you've got data, you're also getting that data protected. So, Misha, I'll hand it off to you now. Let's look a little bit more closely at what the whole attack and recovery cycle looks like.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And I just wanted to say, I think that this last point that Jeff made is so important. I mean, we are all living in a hybrid multi-cloud world. And, this data just shows us that mobility and being able to move data and back up data in multiple environments is more important now than ever. All right, so let's talk a little bit about attack and recovery. So we're going to get a little bit more doom and gloom before we start talking about solutions, but this is important for all of us. It's a sobering reality. So this is more data from our Ransomware Trends Report. So one big fact, almost half of companies' data is typically affected or encrypted during a ransomware attack. And you see, some instances of over 50%, 60, 80% of a company's data. So, I mean, we all can imagine what a crippling, halt that would have on a business. So pretty scary. And then in terms of the average amount of data that can be restored, it's unfortunately on average about 66%, right? So luckily, there's a good healthy percentage, 38%, that can restore 80 to 100% of that data. But look over there in dark red, there's that 7% that may be completely out of luck in restoring. And what we like to say at Veeam is that you can't restore what is not backed up. So this is why a data protection strategy is so integral and important when we talk about ransomware. And why we're also seeing trends within organizational alignment of companies, of security and IT teams working more closely together, because although security is primarily focused on preventing attack, that situation is becoming more and more imminent for companies, that they will be attacked. So being coordinated with their IT teams on how they recover is a really healthy conversation to be had right now. All right. And, to dive a little bit more into that, did the cyber attack affect backup repositories? This is why cyber attacks are different than any type of other disaster. A ransomware attack is a disaster, but unlike, a fire, flood, or other types of data loss, it is harder to identify when to back up from. And cyber criminals are betting that companies will go to their backup as their first line of defense to restore. So they specifically target backup repositories. So companies are looking at ways that they can harden and create immutability with their backups to ensure the data is clean, reliable, and able to be backed up from.
Hey, Misha, I'll chime in on the end of this one if you don't mind. So if you look at the stats, if you think 93% of the time attackers are going to target the backup repositories, if any of the folks online are sort of students of the game and have looked at stats around dwell time and have looked at the different activities, for example, that are part of the MITRE attack matrix that describe what the kill chain looks like once an adversary gets on the network, they're on the network typically for quite a while. They typically escalate privileges. What that means, and we'll dig into this more later, what that means is that if you're designing a solution, it's really, really important to realize that one of the primary targets of the adversary on the network is going to be your backup infrastructure. And they're not going to be clumsy and incapable when they go after that. It is likely that they will have some keys in their hands for the administrative rights for some parts of your infrastructure. Maybe your storage admin, maybe your backup admin credentials at some level or all levels have been compromised. And that's why that kind of thing, this attack rate and the fact that ransomware happens so frequently might explain some of the stats we saw on the last slide with the really dismal ability of people to restore from backups, right? It's not that they're not backing stuff up. It's that when they need it, a lot of times those backups have been deleted before they can be used.
Yeah, great point. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so given all of these facts, clean restores more important than ever. We saw a majority of companies that are restoring directly to production, and varying degrees of that. There's the cross your fingers and restore to production, and then there are most who are restoring and then scanning to make sure that those backups are clean. What we really recommend as a best practice, which it looks like a healthy amount of companies are doing, is restoring to an isolated sandbox or test area, and then scanning before risking reinfection into production. So this is, one of our best practices that we recommend when a ransomware attack happens upon restore.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you remember back to the pervasiveness slide we looked at before, when I mentioned 15% didn't get hit by ransomware, but 16% got hit 4 or more times during the year by ransomware. If you look at the fact that under half of the organizations we surveyed have a really good, practiced, disciplined method for making sure that they remediate malware in the environment before they put those workloads back on, then the reinfection rate, the reattack rate starts to make more sense. Because if you're putting stuff back on the network without having quarantined it and made sure that it's clean first, you're liable to be reinfected, and you're going to find the adversary, the criminals, coming and knocking on your door in 2 or 3 months.
Yep, absolutely. So don't assume that your backups are clean. Make sure to do that scan, ideally in a sandbox or test area, before you store them in production, or you'll risk reinfection. All right. So Jeff, let's talk about cyber insurance. I love this. It's so interesting to see some of the shifts that are happening in real time.
Yeah, I love this topic too. I mean, insurance is just quantified risk. And so seeing the behaviors that organizations have reaching out to get cyber insurance, what the conditions are that they have to meet to get cyber insurance, and what insurers are doing that's changed over the past couple of years in response to this epidemic of ransomware is really illuminating about what the threat actually looks like. So this year, for the first time in the Ransomware Trends Report, we did ask cyber insurance specific questions. And the reason that we did that is that we talk with organizations basically in all kinds of industry verticals every year about their data protection strategies: public sector, private sector, large orgs, small orgs. And really just about the only vertical, the only kind of organization that we talk to where cyber insurance isn't a relevant conversation is typically federal agencies. They don't do that, but many state and local governments do, many towns, counties, and a huge number of private sector orgs do. But look at the differences between the coverage in the cyber insurance policies. I mean, on the good side, we have 95% that either have insurance or are actively looking for it. We have only 2% that are not interested. 3% we used to, but are not currently. A majority, 57%, do have cyber insurance, and it is inclusive of ransomware events. I will point out that if you dig a little bit deeper, what's kind of interesting about that is that there are some cyber insurance policies that insist that organizations pay a ransom, basically to end the disruption as quickly as possible. There are some that forbid the organization to pay a ransom and won't pay the claim part for that. Instead, what they'll pay for is the recovery of the outage. And there are some insurance policies, if you look, 21%, they'll cover you for things like breaches, they'll cover you for other kinds of cyber events, but they will not cover you from ransomware. And of course, the reason for that is that insurers have been losing their shirts over the past couple of years because of the number of claims coming in, specifically from successful ransomware attacks. If we dig into that just a little bit more on the next slide and look at the bars, there's also a bit of variation between the coverage in different areas and the exclusions in different areas. One of the nice things about surveying as widely as we do is that we can find out what the stats are around covering ransomware and what our customers in different areas are dealing with. The one thing I'll point out here, especially if we have any folks from Asia Pacific, Japan on the line today, you'll notice the hard line that insurers are taking there around excluding ransomware. If we're in Latin America, if we're in North America, roughly, broadly the same. EMEA covers Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We've got a nice healthy bar, 63%, that do cover ransomware. as part of the insurance, but not the case in Asia Pacific, Japan. There it's notably lower. It's only 40% or 39%, where if you've got a cyber insurance policy, it's going to cover a ransomware event, which of course has got to put a lot stronger focus for organizations that are in Asia Pacific, Japan, to make sure that they can recover without paying a ransom, because insurance is not going to help them if they get into that strait. There have been other changes as well, in addition to policies covering or not covering ransomware. And this honestly is something that we have been hearing about for years, Misha. And I know you've been involved in these conversations too, on customer panels, at events, things like that. What we find across the board when we ask organizations, what are things looking like for your cyber insurance coverage, for your policies, for the way this is playing out for you now, is that we're in a very, very hardening market. Only 8% of organizations that we surveyed for this year's Ransomware Trends Report said that there had been no changes to payments or benefits. If you look at the other bars, you'll notice they add up to more than 100%. And the reason for that is that this was not a pick one only question. Organizations were allowed to say, yeah, we've had 2 of these things happen to us, or we've had 3 of these things happen to us. What you can see from this is that in an overwhelming number of organizations, the premium increased. And a lot of those organizations also had the deductibles increase. So they're paying more, but they have to pay more out of pocket if an incident actually takes place. And just to put the cherry on top of the sundae here, frequently coverage benefits overall are being reduced as well. Again, the reason for this, if you look at various government reports that have come out about the insurance industry around cyber risk, there's been a lot of concern over the past 2 or 3 years that the insurance industry faces a systemic risk in the face of another large, for example, NotPetya type event going on. And insurers have been asking governments for backstops in case they face catastrophic losses. But in the meantime, they've been doing exactly what insurance companies are good at doing. They've been measuring and quantifying the risk and changing the standards for the policies that are out there. One of the things we're going to deal with in the next section is best practices. And what's interesting about the best practices that Misha and I are going to outline is that if you've been through this, you know, they align very closely with some of the controls that cyber insurers are now asking organizations to meet in order even to be able to qualify for an insurance policy. So Misha, why don't you walk us through some of the practices that we recommend and that increasingly regulators and insurers are also recommending to stay safe?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that many of you out there may be revisiting your data protection strategy. And I think that some of these stats and trends around cyber insurance can really help in the business case on why investing in data protection is going to provide, risk remediation and cost savings, because, there are these other factors in play that premiums are and most likely to go up and deductibles increasing, et cetera. So be sure to include some of this into your business cases. All right, so best practices. Just to recap, some lessons learned, and we've touched on these throughout the presentation. Back up everything. We have to assume the worst, particularly in the rise and escalation of ransomware attacks globally. That includes data in the cloud. Your cloud data is just as susceptible to ransomware attacks as your data center or on-site data, unfortunately. You have to protect those backups. Assume that backups will be targeted as well. And paying a ransom is not necessarily a guarantee that you will get your data back. So backups are going to be your best line of defense against ransomware. And then finally, this is kind of the use case that we are seeing many customers applying, which is data mobility, right? So design for secure recovery to an alternate location. One terrifying anecdote that we've heard from some companies' ransomware experiences is that when a ransomware attack happens, contact the cyber insurance company. The first step is to basically file a report with authorities, and then your data center or center of attack becomes a crime scene and is essentially, taped off and not accessible. So we've seen Veeam customers been able to successfully recover creatively from cloud backups, et cetera, unanticipated because their environments have been roped off after an attack. So Jeff, do you want to talk to us a little bit about some best practices, particularly around 321 and how we have our recommendations are taking that even a step further?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Misha. This plays into the protect those backups point that Misha mentioned on the last slide. We kind of have some fun with it because we have 5 points on this. We call it the data protection zip code. For those of you that are on here from the United States, that'll make sense. But what we've done is build on the old 321 rule that's been around in the data protection space for decades now. And that basically says that if you really want to make sure that you're protecting your data, you need to have 3 different copies of it. That is the production copy, whatever it may be, a virtual machine, a physical server, your production data up on a cloud platform as a service, wherever it happens to be. And you need to have 2 other copies of it. Those copies need to be on 2 different types of media as well. I have seen many times in the last 20 plus years that I've been doing this, folks who have carved off in their own data center a section of their storage array that they want to put their backups on, and then they've been backing up their production to that section of the storage array, which is great until a firmware upgrade from the storage vendor tanks the array. And then they have neither their production data nor their backups. I'll update that for 2023. I've also talked to a lot of organizations that have cloud-based storage, and they are taking snapshots of those resources up in the cloud. And they are figuring, okay, I've got snapshots, that's fine, it's protected. But of course, it is not getting the data onto a fundamentally different type of media. It's still part of the same security context. It's still part of the same storage resources that your production data is using. And as unfortunately, organizations that Veeam has talked to have found out the hard way, that can also leave it vulnerable to being lost unless you have a copy that you've placed on some other type of media. And in the case of cloud resources, as with on-prem, that can often mean getting it off-site, which is where the 1 in the 321 rule comes in. We've all forever known that it was important to have a copy of our data off-site in case of a physical disaster. What the data show, and again, we went over this earlier at the very beginning of the talk, is that you're just as likely to get hit up in the cloud with a ransomware attack. And it is important to think, do I want to replicate my data, to Misha's point about data mobility, cross-cloud? Do I want to send it back on-prem for some of my data sets? How do I make sure that I've got a copy off-site so I keep custody and I can't be completely brought down by a failure of a storage resource? Where Veeam adds some special sauce to this, a little bit of extra, is that the second one of those copies needs to be offline, air-gapped, or immutable. We're going to talk more about immutability on the next slide, so I won't go into that a whole lot here, but I'll mention the 0. You also need a way to make sure that your backups are valid, to non-disruptively and automatically test your backups to see they're fit for purpose. Do my applications actually come up when I bring them up from the backup data? And to the point that we talked about earlier, you need to make sure that you don't reintroduce exploits, malware, ransomware back into your environment when you recover. And you need to do that in an automated way, because making this up manually in the middle of a crisis is the last thing that any organization has time to do or wants to do. So let's dig into this protecting your backups with immutability point. Veeam offers, and we're not the only solution in this space, there's a lot of options that you've got, but Veeam offers a lot of ways to make sure that even if an adversary has compromised every admin credential in your environment, you can still protect backups. We do that on-prem with our ability to write data directly to S3 compatible blob storage on-prem. There's a lot of solutions that Veeam is certified around that, or even just to use commodity Linux hardware and build a hardened repository on-prem to keep your backup data safe. Of course, we also do that up in the cloud, and that includes both S3 and Azure storage, as well as S3 compatible offerings from a large number of Veeam partners there. And importantly, it also extends to the archive tiers for long-term data retention, things like Amazon S3 Glacier and Microsoft Azure Archive Blob Storage. That's really good, especially in these days of long delays around supply chain, of supply chain constraints, because if you want to get immutability right away with Veeam, we don't make you do a forklift upgrade. We don't make you wait for crates to get to your warehouse from ours. You can do this immediately by going to the cloud. That gets even more important when we talk about the idea of being able, the third point on Misha's slide, the idea of being able to securely restore, if needed, to another facility. Because as we talked about, you've got the ability to do a primary copy of Veeam data. You've got the ability to do a secondary copy of that data. And from either of those, from on-prem or from a secondary copy that you've put up in the cloud, you can recover into cloud data centers or into VMware in the hyperscale public cloud or in a colo, in a service provider that you've got a contract with. What this means is huge data flexibility. And if you're in the situation exactly as Misha described before, where federal or state law enforcement have put virtual yellow police tape around your data center and said, sorry, these servers, this storage are now chain of evidence. You can't do anything that would overwrite the forensic information that we're busy searching for to document when the attacker got in, what damage they did, what systems got compromised, et cetera. If you're in that situation, it's very, very helpful to have a hardware agnostic solution like Veeam that will let you have complete data freedom, complete data mobility, and recover up into Azure, up into a local service provider, or into Amazon or Google, right? Really, really critical capabilities in this area. The first point that we made on the preceding slide in the best practices is also an important one, and that's, of course, just that you need to back everything up. Obviously, there's a lot of solutions available for you out there, but the Veeam data platform is a mature, well-regarded by analysts and by market share solution. And one of the reasons that we get such high marks from analysts is that we let you protect a lot of different workloads that are critical to your organization without having to go to a bunch of different service providers to buy different solutions. That stretches, of course, from VMware, where we've led for many years, but it also stretches to other on-prem hypervisors, to the public cloud, including Kubernetes, if you have rolled out containerized applications being orchestrated by Kubernetes, and it extends to physical workloads, to your most critical enterprise apps, and to software as a service. One of the things that is a core development mandate and priority of Veeam is that we expose the ability to back those up, and we use native APIs that are built into all of those apps, whether they're cloud or on-prem, or whether we're making API integrations with on-prem storage platforms. And what that lets us do is lead in backing up and recovering, lead in monitoring and providing analytics about how backup performances are going, and also orchestrate recovery better than anyone else in the industry, both on-prem and in the cloud. So again, the three best practices we've talked about: back up everything, protect those backups, and make sure you can get the data where you need to get it when it's time to recover, because that might not be your own data center. And Veeam's got good solutions around making sure all those things are possible. Now, Keith, I know that Misha and I have been talking for a while. I think I'll pass the baton to you and see if anyone in the audience has any questions for us at this point.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. Great presentation for both you and Misha. Really enlightening. I thought some of the most interesting stuff and things I didn't really know had to do with cyber insurance and how that is changing. That is certainly something to watch going forward, and I imagine it's going to change more as as attacks and victims and all that change too. So you're absolutely right. Lots of great questions, lots of interest from our attendees here. So let's dive into them. We have one here from Rob, and he wants to know what about the more serious, in his opinion, the more serious attacks where your private data is stolen and the ransom is to prevent it from being distributed. This is also known, of course, as a double extortion type of attack. What's your answer for Rob?
Sure, I'll jump in and then Misha can chime in on this one after that. So, Rob, yes, absolutely. The ransomware criminals and operators that are out there now are getting a lot more sophisticated. Attacks frequently involve double extortion, where they both extort you by threatening to expose the data and encrypt it. That's one of the reasons that we strongly recommend as a best practice with Veeam that you encrypt your backup data and that you make sure that not just at rest, but also when you're transferring that, for example, if you're sending data offsite, that's always encrypted. The reason that we suggest that is to make sure that your backups, which are meant to keep you safe, don't themselves become an Achilles heel that an adversary can then just mine to find your sensitive data all in one place and use it to exfiltrate. So it is really important for backups. Obviously, to prevent double extortion, to prevent data exfiltration, you've got to secure the primary systems, but you really need to make sure you secure your backups as well so that it doesn't become a supermarket for critical data that you don't want to get exfiltrated out of your site.
Yeah, just to chime in, I think, what this reminds me of is the importance of planning and, the tabletop exercises and really going through the scenarios, not just, plan on a page. There's actually some really great resources to conduct your own tabletop exercises and scenario plannings. Veeam also helps with documentation and automating documentation for you. Short answer is there's a lot that can go wrong, and planning is going to be your best friend because you definitely don't want to have to be figuring out what your company policy is on these things in the heat of the moment when an attack happens.
Absolutely. Eddie has a question about cyber insurance, which of course we've been talking about. And his question deals with mostly, are there standards of cyber insurance coverage that are mandated by governments at this point? And that's an interesting one. I know that there are laws on the books and increasing efforts that some governments are outlawing the ability to pay ransoms, essentially saying it's now illegal to pay a ransom. But in terms of cyber insurance coverage, do either of you have any insight into whether governments, I guess state and local, are mandating minimum levels of cyber insurance? I'm not aware of this, but you may be.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this first. I have had conversations with organizations. So the short answer is no. I have not talked to any organization that has a mandate from government to have a certain level of cyber insurance. However, I have had multiple conversations with organizations that are in highly regulated industries, like financial services. Organizations that are involved in stock trading or futures trading, organizations that are regulated because they are involved in medical or pharmaceuticals, two other highly regulated industries. The more highly regulated your industry is, the more likely it is that your regulatory body will have very specific ideas about how you need to mitigate your risk from different kinds of attacks. And what I've heard, specifically from an organization that dealt with futures trading, was that they had decided at a certain point, boy, cyber insurance is getting so expensive, let's just set aside $10 million in case we get hit. And we'll basically self-insure, we'll cover the risk ourselves. And that idea survived all of until they had their first conversation with their regulator, who said, "Great plan, no, you're getting insurance," right?
Yeah,
So you
absolutely.
can get prescriptive answers about that, but what I've heard is that it comes from regulators, not from government mandates that affect everybody.
Okay, great. Michael wants to know another follow-up, which is an interesting question. Do some of the cyber insurance companies give a discount if a company has a system, a backup and DR system in place, like Veeam?
The answer is, as I know, and Misha, you can chime in here if you've heard something different. The answer is that 3 years ago, the answer would have been yes, that you can get discounts if you are putting in place controls that make it likely that your claim size will be small if you're hit by a cyber attack. The market has hardened so much in the past several years that the answer now is much more binary. Either you get insurance or you don't. And if you're going to get insurance, you will have to show evidence of strict controls being in place. And those almost always these days are going to include evidence of immutable backups, evidence of multi-factor authentication, and evidence that you've got incident response plans that cover the different kinds of cyber attacks you might get hit with, and that you test and practice those. And I'll just chime in on that. I'll just extend on that. We all talk a lot about ransomware because it is obviously a big threat. But if you look at things like the Verizon breach report that came out recently, or FBI statistics on this, it is far from the only source of data loss. Business email compromise is still a biggie, right? Where email gets compromised and the CEO appears to request the CFO to wire a lot of money to a bank account that's just changed or something like that. That's a different kind of cyber attack, but insurers want you to have practiced your response to that, to ransomware, and to other kinds of things that might happen.
Great, absolutely. So yeah, it's if you have Veeam, you're certainly going to meet certain standards. I think that's fair to say. Okay, Paul wants to know Veeam's IRE. Is it software defined or does it require investment on hardware and appliances?
So what we do for incident response relies on our Veeam 1 application. That alerts us, that contains alerts that can expose when an attack is likely to be taking place, both looking at the primary infrastructure on your Hyper-V or your vCenter environment, and it can detect signals in the backup stream that would indicate that a lot of data has been encrypted on these systems, and so they're likely to have been encrypted. They're likely to have been the victim of a ransomware attack. What I will mention, at our Veeam On conference back in May, we did publicly announce some integrations that are going to be part of the next version of Veeam, which we're tentatively calling 12A. Things can change, and obviously, this is looking out a little bit, so things can change in the future going forward, that we'll be integrating more with security frameworks that are out there. We'll be integrating more with tools that a lot of our enterprise customers use, like, for example, ServiceNow, both to initiate ServiceNow tickets and to have Veeam actions initiated by tickets we receive. So the answer is, right now, software defined in Veeam in terms of how we respond to ongoing security incidents, and that will be only improved in the next edition of Veeam that comes out.
Gotcha. Okay, I think we have time for one more question before we start getting into our wrap up. Theodore has a question about a fairly new offering from Veeam that I think just came out earlier this year. He wants to know, how successful has Veeam been at recovering customer data that is part of the Veeam ransomware recovery warranty? So if a company has gotten that warranty, how successful have you been recovering customer data?
Well, thank you so much. That is a great question. And you are correct. Veeam did announce a ransomware recovery warranty back in February. So it's been in market for about 5 months. We do have customers that are using the warranty today. Obviously can't share any sort of disclosed information on those, but I do have to say one of the things that really excites me the most about the warranty offering is how it really brings together people, process, and technology that helps customers implement best practices. So the warranty is not just a guarantee. It comes with a full team of resources to help ensure that you do have those clean, reliable backups in the event of a ransomware attack. So I think that the engagement, both on kind of like the planning and implementation, as well as quarterly health checks to kind of keep companies accountable, make sure that things are running properly to ensure clean restore. And then also we have just a rock star support team that we call our ransomware SWAT team, that are a tier 1 team that helps all customers, not just ransomware customers, not just warranty customers, but all Veeam customers in the event of a ransomware attack, have that one phone call to make and walk them through the recovery process. So the warranty really allows customers to take full advantage of the best of Veeam people and best practices to implement to ensure those backups are clean.
And without any spoilers here, I think it's fair to say that Veeam has considered this program a big success so far. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. It's spurred a ton of really great conversations, and anything that helps our customers implement best practices so they have those clean, reliable backups is a huge win for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Last question. This is for either or both of you. We've heard a lot about Veeam and what it can do. We've heard a lot about the problem of ransomware and how that is changing and in a lot of ways getting worse. So for folks who are on here today who want to learn more about Veeam, what is the next step that they should take?
So great question. If you, of course, go to veeam.com, there are opportunities on our website to download a trial of Veeam, which is a great way to get familiar with our tool if you're going to be a user and an operator of Veeam. Also, contact us to get connected with sales through our website. We'd love to talk. There's also some pages on our website specifically dedicated to our ransomware offering, our ransomware protection and recovery offerings, as well as information on that warranty. And for many of those pages, you can request a consultation specific to ransomware.
All right. Outstanding. So thanks so much for putting together a great presentation, for all of your insights in the Q&A. Jeff and Misha, we really appreciate your time today. And I want to mention again the handouts that you have included. There's still some more time to download them, the Ransomware Trends Report and the Strategic Framework for Ransomware Resilience. They're both in the handouts section. And again, we encourage everyone to download those now. Jeff and Misha, thanks so much for your time today. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Keith.
Yeah, thanks so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you very much. You too. All right. That is close to the wrap here today. We do have one more really important thing to take care of, and that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. I don't think any of you want us to forget that. As I mentioned before, you have to be present for the entire event to be eligible for the prize. And we do have a winner for today. The winner of the $250 Amazon gift card is Leonard Forzati from Massachusetts. I hope I said that correctly. Leonard Forzati from Massachusetts. Congratulations to you, Leonard. We will be in touch very soon to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Media team, I want to thank Veeam for making this event possible. I want to thank all of you for joining us and for your participation, for hanging out with us for part of your day. I hope you learned a lot today and enjoyed this. I certainly enjoyed being on with you. That concludes the event, and have a great rest of your day.